Hey, well, thanks. My name is Richard Dancy. I'm an archivist at SFU, and because you heard this morning from Paul's talk, SFU has been one of the partners in the Crossing Fonds project. So, it's not very. I'm not really sharing here properly. Am I? The assistants here? How do I just get rid of that?
You want to click that back, I think, again.
Just want to get rid of that.
Oh,
Oh,
they don't
just-
see
okay,
that.
okay. Sorry. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is, a question that you asked this morning. So one of the parts I was involved in the project was getting data out of our system. We use Atom, access to memory software, and getting it into the Omeka platform. Is this okay? Getting it into I'm going to put my water here because I know I spill. I'm going to so just how we got our data out and got it into Omeka. Originally, this session was going to be a joint one with Vivo to talk because they got a similar problem with collective access, but unfortunately, Emily is not able to make it today, so you just got me. So what I'm going to do is talk a bit about Atom, how it fits into the Crossing Fonds sort of project. So just starting more generally, what does it mean to cross-fall? What is a platform that enables people to do that? Where does Atom fit in? I think, two key ideas is just that idea that researchers should be able to discover material that exists across different repositories, but then be able to do something with it, right? So have that space for curation tools, analyze, gather, visualize, annotate, collaborate, and create their own kind of collections and projects. So, in a sense, Atom, it does have some of those discovery tools, but it doesn't really have the curation part. And the question, I guess, so it's not that I think Atom needs to become a Crossing Fonds platform. It's more like how can Atom support a Crossing Fonds platform in the areas where it intersects. So what I'll do today is just say really briefly, what is Atom, and then look at a couple of examples where it does sort of intersect, and just hopefully to the benefit of both. So what is Atom? Really quickly, it's just, I think a lot of folks here will kind of know, but it's an open source platform for archival description. It's been around for about 15 years, I think, where 2007, 2008 was when it first was released. It's typically used by institutions as a kind of a public-facing online catalog to their holdings, but it also gets used, especially in Canada, as a sort of multi-repository system where you have like a kind of union catalog. You have so in BC, for example, we have Memory BC. This idea that all sort of archival repositories can contribute their descriptions to this one portal, single place to find stuff. And so other provinces and territories have something similar. Those in turn get aggregated up at the national level to Archives Canada, but most of those portals are running on Atom. So it kind of has a long history of that sort of Crossing Fonds searching in that sense. I think some of the things that archivists like about it, I mean, there's things people don't always like about it, but some of the things that people like about it, it is very much based on archival description standards. So initially, those were the standards of the ICA, the International Council on Archives, and it was originally designed to give ICA members a kind of free open source tool they could use. Quickly developed into supporting other standards. So in Canada, we tend to use RAD, the Rules for Archival Description. In the States, it tends to be DACS, Describing Archives, a content standard. So it supports all those as well as Dublin Core and mods. So it is very much based on the specificities of archival description. And one of those is just that idea of multi-level description that we need. I think it's fair to say in libraries, galleries, museums, the focus tends to be on item level cataloging. In archives, we hardly ever do that. We do sometimes, normally we're starting with the aggregate of all the items and work our way down. And usually we don't get there. Sort of fritters out somewhere between series and files typically. So, but just an example here. So what you're looking at here is our site. It's the Arthur Erickson Fall. He was the original architect of SFU. We have some of his records, including his home movies, his earlier home movies, travel films on. It's kind of interesting. But what I guess I wanted to show here was both how that sort of multi-level description is managed in Atom, but also where we do have an item level description, which we may do when we have AV material. One of the things Atom's kind of good at is being able to deliver that, right? So, you can actually view it on screen or you can download it if you want, but it's you know, it's not beautiful. It's not an exhibition space. It's not a curation space. It's really purely delivery. You know, we've described it. You want it, you got it. That's kind of what Adam's doing. And maybe just one other kind of point to make about Adam before I move on is just there is a kind of, I think there has been a long kind of sense of a community driven sensibility to it. And part that was because it is open source, but it is mostly developed and maintained by a company called Artifactual, who are based in nearby New Westminster. But they're at least, well, for a long time, the kind of development model has been a sort of bounty model where, you know, if you're an institution, you have some money, you want a feature, they'll build it and put it into the code. So, you know, there's issues with that. It means after 15 years, you got a kind of, you know, a lot of disparate features sort of bolted onto the code, which is problematic from a maintenance point of view. But it did lead to the sort of kind of community sense that we can kind of impact the software. Okay, so where does that stand in relation to a Crossing Fonds platform? I think to me, they're sort of coming at it from different angles. In a sense, Adam is kind of driven by institutions that need to manage their holdings, communicate what they have, and provide access to them. Whereas a Crossing Fonds platform, whatever it is, the Omeka one, but others, I think is mainly driven by researchers who want to discover widely and then do that sort of curational stuff. So to me, that's so they're kind of, it's the same material that they're coming at from different angles. And to me, that's sort of a good thing. Like we don't really need to build, you know, one monolithic system that tries to do everything, but there are those areas where it intersects, where it overlaps. So I think if we look at those, you can kind of identify areas or ideas where, okay, like how could it do it better? And on both sides. So ideally to the benefit of both. So I'll just take a couple examples pretty quick. One is how you get stuff like sort of out of Adam and make it available to a Crossing Fonds platform, but also how do you get stuff back in coming from perhaps a Crossing Fonds platform. So, you know, there's a lot of talk about linked data in archives and publishing linked data, but what about making the system receptive to linked data, to pulling it back in? And so I'll just say, you know, pretty quickly about that. So getting stuff out, you know, Kahani's was sort of talking today and yesterday, just some of that CSV kind of importing, but the current model in Adam is very much a kind of export, import, replicate. So we have, you know, so with MemoryBC, you know, we take our stuff out of Adam, import it into MemoryBC. MemoryBC in turn takes all of BC's descriptions and then exports, and they get imported into Archives Canada. So, you know, that's okay, but a couple of issues that come up with that is, you know, what gets replicated is not the whole thing. What we typically send out is just a truncated font level description. So, and over time, those diverge pretty quickly because every time we make an edit, it's not mirrored in the other sites, right? And then there's just the, you know, it's kind of a hassle to do, right? You know, it's not super difficult, but it's also not trivial to do that. We have the same issue with the Crossing Fonds. We had to get our stuff out and get our stuff in. So are there other ways that one could look at doing that? And I think for the future, like I think there should be, right? Ideally, so two sort of protocols, I suppose, OAI, PMH. So that idea of the Open Archives Initiative, protocol for metadata harvesting, but that's the idea. An institution can expose its data to service requests from external systems that can query and retrieve. So Adam does have some of that, but not a whole lot. And where you kind of get stuck is kind of all or nothing. You can sort of, through OAI, we can deliver the whole file description from the file to the items, but you don't have that idea of selection, right? That I think what we ideally want is a sort of interface in Crossing Fonds where the users can kind of have access to the catalog data of all these participating repositories, and they can make the selections, right? They can pull out and bring in what they want rather than administrators kind of doing it for them. So OAI is one way, but it needs more work in Adam for sure. The other thing I'll just mention here quickly is the IIIF, the International Image Interoperability Framework, which we sort of touched on a bit today. But it's that idea that a repository can take its digital objects, put them on a server, create some structured metadata that follows the IIIF standards credit manifest, and then an external system that has a IIIF viewer can read those manifests and render your object in their system. So you don't really need to replicate in a sense. So potentially kind of powerful, but right now Omeka does have some of that ability, but Adam does not. And I know there has been a fair bit of interest in the community. Like, so Adam right now, he can't really generate IIIF manifests nor read them. And it would be nice if it could do that. So yeah, so it's just an area where I think, actually, let me go back. Just to finish up that thought, it's just an area where I think there could be a lot of work on both sides. So on the side of Atom, better support for OAI, better support for IIIF, but on a Crossing Fall platform, actually build that interface that lets people, that uses those protocols to let people pull in what they want, would be a kind of nice feature. What about flipping that around, just that idea of letting other perspectives and information in? So I think traditionally archival description is kind of a one-way street. The archivists write the descriptions and the users read them, and that's kind of it, right? That approach and the whole sort of approach to finding aids does kind of privilege, while also, the creator's standpoint, right? Because what we're usually describing in our finding aids, it's a person or organization that accumulated the records. We're describing their history, their activities, their relation to the records. But what about everybody else who was involved in the records, who has a perspective on it, whether they're, especially if they are subjects of the records or communities that were affected by the activities that gave rise to the records? That stuff tends to be shut out. So how do you get it in? How would that work? And there was some discussion, I think yesterday at one of the workshops, which was kind of interesting, just about that idea of tags, but user contributed content. So it could be in the form of content or comments. It could be in the form of metadata. It could be in the form of objects themselves. And I think there'd be a lot there for archives to try to figure out policy-wise. But I guess the point is, within Atom right now, you couldn't do any of that, right? So there's none of that. So that's an area that kind of needs to be developed. I think one little thing that would be, so it's little, I'm not a developer, but it would be nice if an Atom site, for example, could allow users to, contribute annotated links to their own uses of the material, right? So you think within our Crossing Fall platform, I'm taking stuff from City of Vancouver, I'm taking stuff from Vivo, from SFU. If there's a little module in Omeka that says, okay, give me a stable URL, here's a little blurb on it, click, off it goes to those systems. So on the Atom side, you need to be able to receive those requests and incorporate them into the finding aid. But it would be kind of nice, it would be a small thing, but kind of interesting. Like a lot of times archivists don't know how their stuff is used, but also researchers could see, there's other perspectives, there's other stories with the records, and off you go, right? So, so that's just really two examples. What about future prospects? Is that going to happen on the Atom side? No, in the short term, like right now. And so, I just wanted to say a little bit, so future prospects. So one of the issues with, I think, Atom right now is, it's 15 years old. The base code is written with a framework called Symphony, which is kind of at its end of life with the version they're using. It needs, everyone has known for years now, we need to overhaul it, right? It needs a base code revamp. Nobody's had the money to do it. And that's sort of a kind of big issue. So one of the things that was the community tried to do was create this access to memory foundation, which I'm on there. Paul was on there for a while. And that idea was that through membership fees and through grants, we would raise money to create this Atom 3. That was the idea. And, I have to say, kind of not successful. So, just the volume of money we need, is more than we're getting, right? So in a sense, the impasse is kind of, it's almost like Atom is an open source code. It's not really an open source project because there's not a lot of other developers aside from Artifactual. Atom Foundation wanted to be an open source project, but it's got no code. It kind of has no ability to write code. So we need a way out of that impasse. How that happens, I'm not totally sure, but I think for these sort of big sort of ideas that we're kind of using here, that's what needs to happen, right? So maybe on a, I think I have a bit more time, just on a, I don't know if it's an optimistic note or another pessimistic signal, but I mentioned there were archival standards that were the origins of Atom, the ICA ones. Well, they've all been overhauled recently. So in November, December, a new standard came up to replace the old ones, records in context. It's kind of a different thing than anything archivists are used to. Most descriptive standards have been, here's the elements you need to prepare a finding aid. Whereas Rick kind of takes the idea of a more data modeling approach. Here are the entities involved in description. Here's their attributes, here's their relationships. Now you figure out how you want to output all that. You've got to structure it, but it's almost like it's structuring data so a machine can process it to produce outputs that humans can read. and one of those outputs would be the traditional finding aid, but just one of them. So the promise is that there'll be all these other kind of things that we could do potentially, right? There is some controversy about it. I think everyone likes the idea of RIC. Whether they like the execution, I don't know. That's the thing. So there was and it's maybe more it wasn't maybe a lot of transparency in how decisions were arrived at. So recently, for example, the SAA, the Society of American Archivists, sort of put out a statement sort of saying they're pausing the implementation of RIC because they weren't really happy with decisions that were made without having any sort of input into them. So I don't know what's going to happen there. It'll be interesting to watch that, but I do think any kind of descriptive system in archives is going to move somewhere towards RIC. These are RIC adjacent, and what that will look like, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But it is maybe a way out of that impasse, right? I mean, I think the long term, the best would be if some big institutions would say, build me a system that is like RIC, and a company like Artifactual were able to do that, and then say, okay, but it's also going to be open source and available to the community. So that's probably we're going to be going, but I don't know. So I think I'll just leave it there and finish.
Thanks, Richard. Next up, we've got Miriam Sturdee.
Will it just go to my slides magically, or?
Escape, and
Oh, right. So,
it's bad that you're relying on me to do this, but then what's this link for the 6 house? That's you? Yeah.
oh, thank you very much. Excellent. Yeah, so now for something completely different. I'm not an archivist and I haven't built a magical platform. What I have done is lots of research into sketching, as you might have noticed. And I'm not sketching myself right now because I can't do two things at once. But also other forms of new technology that might potentially be used in the future to help visualize different kinds of knowledge. So my background is very sort of magpie-like, so I borrowed from a lot of different areas, which I think just generally happens in your 20s when you don't know what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, so you do everything, and eventually it all comes together and you end up working with Sheila, which is fantastic. But yeah, so a lot of what I'm concerned about is what data is and what it can be. So some people talk about data as being collected on purpose, but we could also think about data as just being everything, but that could be quite overwhelming. But if we think about data as being everything, then how on earth can you record everything when it involves so much more than visuals or text or even audio? And as Marion had said, humans have been creating and disseminating knowledge through other means well before we could write. We had the oral tradition of passing on songs and stories. For a long time, the writings were held in the church, so people didn't, either weren't taught to write or were made, not allowed to write because it was a kind of like that knowledge was being kept. So we found other ways of exploring through woodcuts and engravings and mark making on, I think as Sheila said yesterday, it was the Ashango bone, where someone recorded their menses like 10,000 years ago. So humans are really, 40, oh, even better. So, I don't think I would want a period that lasted 40,000 years. But yeah, so people are really creative at finding ways to record their lives and their beings and their lived experience. But because data isn't purely visual, we can't always digitize everything. It can't always just be text, audio, video, images. How might we actually start to think about recording a feeling or an object or something like that? And one of the things I advocate for is being creative, sketching, thinking about ideas in creative and often artistic ways, which isn't always welcomed by the computer science community that I work in, because I think as someone said once, where's the programming? And there isn't any. It's all about thinking about how we might go about designing that next generation of interface or the next big idea. You can't just step out, program something or build something and engineer it without thinking about it. And sketching and being creative and artistic will give us those tools that we need for the next generation. So sketching helps us make sense of the world around us, processing, converting, and interrogating information. Some of the projects I've done look very much about how people represent incredibly complex concepts through the medium of simple sketchings and drawings. So this is someone looking at how you visualize cybersecurity concepts. One of the interesting things we found is that people know it's all digital, they know it's all magically somewhere in the cloud, but they make sense of what they can't understand through what they do understand, which is usually physical objects. The idea of interpersonal connections, the idea of, you know, seeing into other people's lives or grasping something. And we can also use, no, it's not. We can also create new knowledge linked to other data. So sketching can forge connections between data and people. So I once got asked to sketch a conference that was, I think, 8 multiple tracks at once. And I said, yeah, that's not going to happen. I can't do that. So instead, we developed a workshop to teach other people how to sketch note and how to record data. And these were the programming type of computer scientists, the ones who really, really don't like drawing. But by the end of the conference, as you can see, we had a huge exhibition. People were engaging, people were excited by the idea that they could sketch their thoughts as these sessions were happening. And a lot of people took it forward and still, I think, haven't had any recent references to it, but some people said they'd taken it forward into their practice every day ever since they learned how to do it. This was in Toronto, incidentally. There were some really, really inspiring talks. So I like to think about art and data as an interaction space. And data just takes many forms. I think I said that at the beginning, but revisiting these artistic and creative practices has the potential to inform design and then data visualization or physicalization in turn. So one of the things that I've been doing today is very much reportage. So you go into a space and you take little snapshots of that experience. And because you're sketching, it reduces that kind of barrier between people that you might get if you take a photograph or you're taking a video or something like that. It's when you're sketching, people are often curious, they're often welcoming, and they'll really want to see what you've been doing afterwards. And it allows you to get some really unique insights and also feel part of what's going on. So human data interaction is a big part of the challenge, but apprehending data and finding frames to understand it, especially if it's diverse, is quite difficult. So can imagining data as a creative material help with this? And by a material, I mean, what if, you know, paper, pens, paint, and even concrete? If you imagine data as something we can grasp and build with, or even throw at someone, then it might start to make a little more sense as a design challenge. And Sheila mentioned painting with data. And in fact, we did actually together invite people to paint with data at Calgary. So in order to make it very, very formal and exact, we extracted data with syringes to the exact amount corresponding to a known data set, which is quite a fun one. It's like inappropriate behaviors or appropriate behaviors in the 1970s. Like, is it appropriate to fall asleep in a job interview? Should you kiss someone in an elevator? So people found it quite a fun data set to work with, and they often put a bit of themselves into it. So while many people were bound by bar charts, we even had a nightingale rose, or things like pie charts and things like that. We had people who really took the idea that they could paint quite literally. So we have a Rothko-esque one, top third from the left on your side. We had people who physicalized that paint by building it up and letting it dry into huge lumps. So people started working with it in very creative ways. And by allowing people to do this, we can start thinking about other ways we might represent and record data. But if we're creating physical data, how on earth could we actually capture this in a way that doesn't involve having the warehouse from Raiders of the Lost Ark? We can't keep everything. As anyone who's moved house will know that, evidently you have to get rid of a lot of stuff, even if you don't want to. But then what if the data wasn't just physical, but also multimodal? So, I mean, I can't store the smell of my parents' staircase, which I was very close to the carpet at that point. That's why I still remember it. But what if we could? The first step to this is something which people are working on in human-computer interaction, which is space I'm in, called shape-changing interfaces. So the idea that eventually we'll be able to have those nanobot-style things or actuated devices that mean we can interact physically with them. So then when we 3D scan an object, because that's something that is possible now, instead of just printing a static representation of it, what if we encoded that as a digital pattern? And we had an interface that could replicate the feel and the form of that object as well. So these are very much baby steps, because the technology we need to build nanobot interfaces like in Big Hero 6 is quite a way off. But we can think about the materiality and the feeling and how those things might translate into programmable matter. From a visualization perspective, there's also potential to do things that are known, like the bar charts. Bar charts are everywhere, and it's kind of annoying, but they're quite an easy way of getting other people involved with data visualization. So this is Emerge. Emerge is a 10 by 10 actuated platform, which you can scroll through larger data sets with. It's controlled by tablets, but also directly interacting with the data in the form of pushing or pulling the bars, or like pushing two at once to hide rows and things like that. And we invited people to explore a data set collaboratively in this sense, to see, how did that make them feel about data? How did they discuss it? How did the added modality help them understand it? I don't have any concrete conclusions other that people were very, very nice to each other. So one of the things I think Sheila studied was territoriality, your table space. So I've got my little space there. I'm like, no one comes near my pens, stay away. Whereas with the physical data, people were really inclusive. They would move around or like, oh no, you go first. And it became a conversation, not just here are my, monthly stats, the end. It became a really nice dialogue. But researchers, other than me, because I can't do everything, are working with other diverse forms of interactivity. So haptics is something we're familiar with, like the feeling that we've pressed a button on our phone when we haven't really. Smells, which has massive connotations for allergies, because the smell capsules, the ones they in Japan, they can't guarantee they don't contain very strange things. Even fog interfaces, bubbles, and so a lot of people are interested in how you represent emotions through physicality or interactive devices. So there's a huge potential, but I think some of it might be wishful thinking at this stage. The challenge really is for us is how to tap into the experience of being human, and the potential for creating immersive worlds of data, not just ones that we see on a screen. And I'm probably going to, it says I have 4 slides. I don't think I really have that many. But this is a playful look at what happens if you reimagine research projects or read the research paper and what that might mean if we start creating experiences instead of simply text and pictures. So that came out of lockdown, as you might have guessed, because it's a bit crazy and introspective. I actually spent one New Year, I actually went into the Egg and met one of my other friends who was an author giving a guided tour to his other friends, because we weren't allowed to go anywhere in the UK. So it was a great way of getting together. So that was an appropriation of an existing platform for conferencing called GatherTown, which does have accessibility issues, but it's thinking about how we might start to reimagine what well, in this case, a conference contribution is, but also the experience of research data. So yes, takeaways. New technology is promising all these amazing things. We're not quite there yet, but there's a lot of space to imagine how that might work. And I think I really believe in those baby steps are just as important or more important than actually building the end product. Because if you don't sketch things out first and think about them, you might make a lot more mistakes along the way. So what data might be and what archiving might be could change completely when technology catches up with our imaginations. But there will be then again the same challenges, but for every kind of modality you can imagine. So I think the future of archiving is looking good, and I don't think AI is going to take everyone's jobs if we still need all this creative input into how we look at things. Oh yeah, yeah, managing AI. So yeah, I'm inviting you all to think creatively, because creative thinking and practice is vital to understanding the future. There you go. Okay. So return the favor and try and get rid of my presentation. Oh, you didn't? Did you upload it to the wrong folder?
No, they didn't.
Sydney? We're missing a presentation. I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had Nancy and Bushy and Sturdee, but we're Mark. We're missing Mark's presentation. I'm going to go and sketch your presentation now. So go and sit down. I'll come back to the front at the
Well, it should be on the key here. So what is this? Is this Microsoft? I don't do anything with Microsoft. What happened to our systems person? Well, first of all, I'm using the wrong thing.
I just want to, I had made an omission when I was doing my presentation, and I want to point out that
Let's see if we can
a
get
graduate research assistant who works with me on Interparis Trust AI projects is here, and her name is Rachel Petrocchi. So if anyone wants at all
Well,
to
we
chat
found
with
this-
her
it's on-
about the
And it was
process
trying
of
to-
learning about machine learning and computer vision and its
No, it's gone.
applications, please grab.
So
her
how do I get
as
to
well.
how do I get to this? Who's the Microsoft person? CUDC, there it is. Yeah. Great. Okay. Hi, after all that. In 1985, I got my first PC with Microsoft DOS on it. And after about a day, I said, no way. Got rid of it, moved over to Mac, and I haven't left Mac since. My name's Mark Fox. I'm a professor of industrial engineering and computer science at the University of Toronto. My background is artificial intelligence, and I've been doing that for 50 years, 45 years, something like that. And my area of expertise is in knowledge representation and reasoning, though I have for a decade taught courses on decision sciences for cities and machine learning, but I don't profess to be a machine learning expert. One of the hats that I wear at the University of Toronto is I'm director of the Center for Social Services Engineering, so I do a bunch of work in the social services space and applying knowledge representation, AI, et cetera, to that. Another hat that I wear is as director of the Urban Data Research Center within the School of Cities at the University of Toronto. So my main area of focus from an application point of view, besides social services, is cities in general. And I work in the area of knowledge representation for city knowledge, digital twins, all that type of stuff. So why am I here? Because Sarah suggested. I should be here. So I'm going to take you through what it is that we're doing within the Urban Data Research Center that may be of interest to people sitting here. Now, I want to say at the outset that I really enjoyed the last three presentations. They were terrific. I learned a lot. I don't think mine is going to be nearly as interesting. So I therefore have to put some excitement into my voice. So at least you'll pay attention, maybe. Okay, so I've been at this game in the data area, knowledge representation, for a long time, okay? And I'm somewhat jaded when it comes to all of this. And in particular, I often say to people when I'm at a meeting, to me, data is a four-letter word, okay? It's a swear word. And why is data a four-letter word for me? Because it's easy to talk about. Everybody everywhere talks about data, evidence-based decision-making. We need more data. We have lots of data. Anyway, they all talk about data. And I have this basic problem, at least within the world of cities. And if you know cities, cities cover everything and anything. So if we talk about digital archives, yeah, that's in cities. If you talk about recreation and parks, that's in cities. If you talk about healthcare, it's in cities. So cities cover everything you can possibly imagine. So therefore, I have to deal with issues around data in cities, which covers all types of data. And so there's this assumption that people in the levels of decision-making that we have lots of data and we should be able to make decisions using that data. And they don't realize how difficult it is. So in the world of data-driven decision-making, data sciences, data analytics, we know that 80% of the time that you spend building data analytic systems is spent doing what's referred to as data wrangling. And data wrangling is a process of transforming the data into something that's actually usable. Now, that may be syntactic, it may be cleaning up errors, it may be dealing with missing data, but it also has to do with when you take data from multiple sources, they have different data models. So if I want to create an archival system, and now I'm really putting myself out there because what do I know about archival systems? But if your archival system is bringing in data from multiple sources, not just within the city, but from around the world, okay? They have their own data models. They don't represent it. Let's forget about multiple languages, but just, if it's all English, different data models, different attributes, different objects. And somehow you got to make sense of these. Do they overlap? Do they mean the same thing? Do they say the same thing, but they're totally different? And those are the types of problems that I worry about as part of my knowledge representation research. So data. There's huge amounts of it. What you see on the screen is just some analysis or that was put together, not by me, by other people. What is it? Finance Online that identifies the amount of data that's being generated out there. So we're swimming in a sea of data. But the problem is, at least within the world that I live in, there's a lack of awareness of what data is actually out there. So we have lots of data, but we don't know what is out there. Okay, and part of the reason for that is that we can't know everything. Part of the reason is that data is scattered all across the country. If we just talk about Canada, okay, and part of the reason is that it's hidden by whatever rules of privacy or I own it, you can't have it, whatever the case may be. It's all spread out there, and there's absolutely no way you are going to know, except Sarah will know. You will know what data is there, where it's located, et cetera. It's just spread out there. And a couple of years ago, I was working with various agencies at the federal level and provincial level. And every time I talk to an agency about what they're doing with data, they say to me, oh yeah, we're gathering all our data sets and we're creating a portal for it, okay? Well, multiply the number of government agencies in the country, you'll get an idea of what the minimum number of portals are that are being created. And how are you going to find those portals? How are you going to search them? What do you know what's out there, okay? So this is the problem, the lack of awareness of what data is actually out there. And then there's another part, which is lack of relevance. That is, there's a huge gap between the data you have and the data you need. Okay? And that's a problem because we don't usually know what we need. And if we do know what we need, it's usually not available. So we got the lack of awareness, we got the gap, lack of relevance, a whole bit that makes easy to talk about data, difficult to actually do something with data. So I have to say that this particular project, the Canadian Urban Data Catalog, is not a research project for me. It was just a project that I started because I was frustrated with the fact that everybody's creating their own portal out there and nobody's talking to each other. Okay, so if you want to know where the money is going for the portal that you want to build and you can't get anybody to fund it, it's because they're spending it on themselves. Okay, all the government agencies are spending it internally because they're going to build a portal just for their data. Okay, so we decided we should do something of relevance to the Canadian sector, data sector at large. And since I had the money, I decided to go for it. And it's very simple. There's nothing deep about this. We're just creating an online catalog of data sets. Okay. And it would catalog open data sets that may be downloadable and usable by you. It catalogs closed data sets that are accessible under some type of agreement, and it catalogs web services that generate data. So we want to know about every type of data that's out there and put it into our catalog. And we catalog it regardless of what the location is and what the method of access is. We just want to know that it exists. This directly addresses the awareness problem. Okay, and there should be absolutely no reason why anybody should say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to put my data set into your catalog. Because by putting into catalog, all we're saying is we're putting in the metadata to describe that particular data set. We're not asking for you to put the data set itself in there. So that was the conceptualization of what we're trying to do. And then we said, well, what metadata should we use to describe all of these data sets? And so we went out into the world of metadata for data sets, and there's been a lot of work on that. There was only one problem. There was too much work on it. Okay, and what I mean by that is, if you go and you look at it, the vocabularies, or if you want to call it an ontology, or whatever the case may be, the number of attributes was in at least 100, if not more. Okay. I may know a lot about knowledge representation, but I don't even know which of those attributes I want to use. So we said, let's make it easy for people. Why don't we identify what the metadata is that you should be providing? So we searched the literature, we did a literature review, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We looked at how people search for data sets. We looked at what vocabularies exist for the metadata for data sets. And we grouped all of this into a number of categories of metadata: content, access, ownership, provenance, temporal, geospatial information for the data sets, statistical information about the property distribution, et cetera, quality of the data. So we identify what different categories are. And then what we said is we need what's called a maturity model. Anybody ever hear of what a maturity model is? Comes out of the software world, okay? And my claim to fame for the maturity model is I was asked to be on the board of directors of that group, and I turned them down because I didn't think it was important. So the maturity model is very simple. It says you got to walk before you run. The lower levels of the maturity model are the easy things, possibly. And as you go higher in maturity, your information is more sophisticated, deeper, broader, et cetera. And so we said, if we create a maturity model to make it easy for people to provide metadata, where would we start? So level one focuses on what we have seen in the literature is the most important pieces of information, that is metadata, that people use to search for data sets. So why don't we devise our system so that if it's going to get anything out of you, it's going to first ask for level one. And then it'll take you up to level two, focus on content of the data set, authorship, ownership. Level 3, focus on additional content, versioning, fair principles, temporal, geospatial. 4, focus on privacy and identifying data of individuals captured by the dataset, including guidelines for indigenous communities, OCAP-related principles. 5, focus on fair principles in more detail. 6, focus on statistics and quality. So that's what we did, was we created this metadata maturity model so that we can then guide people when they go and catalog their data set according to these levels. Give us level 1, please. If you're going to do anything, don't leave before you give us level 1. And if you really feel gung-ho, let's go to level 2 and maybe beyond. So what did we do? The data catalog, the Canadian Urban Data Catalog, is built on top of CCAN. So I saw the arguments earlier. Do you build or you reuse something else? This day and age, you reuse something else. Anybody who starts from scratch better have a really good reason. Anyway, so we took CCAN, we built a plugin which implements the maturity model, and we modified CCAN so that it takes you through that maturity model when you are cataloging a data set. We then held a couple of panels, one in the area of transportation, the other in housing, with researchers in the area to identify what were the types of data they need, what do they have, what do they not have, et cetera, so that we could then guide a group of curators to go and search for and add data sets to the catalog. And so we found useful employment for a large number of information and library science graduate students to search out all the different types of data sets that are publicly available and provide the metadata for them. And so there's right now over 1,100 data sets that are cataloged currently within CUDC. Much to my surprise, that's larger than a lot of other repositories, et cetera, that we have run across. And they cover things like transportation, housing, homelessness, environment, bylaws, culture and tourism being some of the most. And the data sources are the normal cast of characters that you would expect in these areas. We also are populating the catalog by extracting automatically the metadata descriptions of data sets in other platforms. So as you are well aware, or maybe not, there are a number of platforms out there that are sort of standard in terms of various organizations using them for their open data platform. We're built on CCAN. We now have a automated extraction program that goes into CCAN platforms and pulls out the data. And we're now moving on to, we're moving on to Socrata. I was told this morning before we go on to Dataverse, Data Hub, DCAN, and other things of that nature. And so the whole idea is very simple. We automatically extract whatever updates there are to the the open data platform platforms out there, so that we continue to expand on expand on the content of the catalog. This is a picture of the Canadian Urban Data Catalog. There's nothing really fancy going on here. You can go and type in a bunch of keywords and do your search, or you can use the metadata maturity model to type in possible values for different attributes, metadata attributes to search by. And it too will use whatever taxonomies has been specified for possible values to select. In this case, I typed in culture and comes back with 27 culture items. And the top one here is the cultural spaces in Toronto. Click on that. It then begins to take you, it gives you the catalog entry, which is showing you maturity level 1 attributes down here. This is showing you maturity level, I don't know, 2 probably attributes, and you can go through all the maturity levels. to see what the attributes are that are associated with it. Oh, and this is maturity level 4, which also includes OCAP related information. So we know whether it contains indigenous information, et cetera. In addition to being a catalog, it is also a repository, though that is not the main focus of this work. Okay, and the only reason why we make available the repository capabilities is because you know as well as I, everybody out there says they're creating data sets, and once they finish their project or whatever it is, where does it end up? It ends up on a laptop that eventually gets trashed. And there goes your data set. So what are we going to do with all these homeless data sets? I used to call them orphaned data sets, but somebody said that would be inappropriate language. But given that I'm a bro, okay,
I knew that was gonna come up.
given that I'm a bro and that I'm an AI bro, and I also have, where I do have hair, gray hair, I use the term orphan, but now I use homeless. So once the project is completed, where do those data sets reside? And the answer is you can put them into the CUDC so that we don't lose them. So if you're creating databases and you don't know where to put them, we welcome not just your cataloging of data sets, but also depositing them if you don't have another place for them. Other features in the catalog, everything that's in the catalog is stored using a knowledge graph, linked data. The actual metadata maturity model is defined as an ontology. Catalog entries have attached reviews, and we're working on expanding our review capability to have more different types of information that people provide about the data sets that are there. And we want to use ChatGPT to summarize metadata descriptions in a language that people can understand, which will be good. But I do have some caveats about ChatGPT and other generative AI LLMs, is they're not magical. Okay, they're really hard to get to do what you want to do. So if you want to do something with it, don't have high hopes at the outset. Okay, you know, if you want to go and work on your resume, that's great. If you want to do some summarization of some text, that's great. The more difficult stuff is still difficult. Okay, let me get closer to the end. Partners, OCAD-U is a partner with us amongst others. And the project that we're doing with OCAD-U, actually it's OCAD-U's project, and we're just providing some support to it. OCAD-U and 3 of the team are here, over here, have been working on discovering and describing and creating a spreadsheet of culture and arts data sets around Canada. They've done an amazing job, and so identify Canadian cultural databases, and they're going to talk about it tomorrow. So you'll get a lot more information about it. So I don't want to steal their thunder. All we're really doing is working together to align their data model that they have in their spreadsheet with the data model that's in the Canadian Urban Data Catalog, and then automate the translation of each data set they have identified in their spreadsheet into separate entries within the Canadian Urban Data Catalog, so they're all separately represented, searchable, et cetera. And that then allows open access to all of the wonderful work that they're doing so that it can be used by many people. And that's just the catalog entry for the Canadian Cultural Database Catalog. In our catalog, and I think I'm at the end. If my presentation has not been enlightening, at least it has been energetic. We all know that bias is in our computer. We all know that bias is in our computer systems. We also know it's in our human systems. It's easy to talk about bias. It's easy to talk about the desire to remove bias. It's another thing to actually do that. And so in order to make the first step in that direction, you have to define what the nature of the bias is in the application that you have. Once you do that, then you can start taking steps towards are we changing the data that we use to train a large language model or a small language model? All right, what can we do to address it? But we first have to define what the nature of that bias is for the Datasets at hand.
We have a question.
Can I
from-
just say that I have like 10 resources on dealing with bias. And I just, Sydney, maybe we can figure out a way for me to provide them, get them posted and shared rather than my reading them out. I am optimistic that it's possible to use AI and work effectively with data.
Oh, you got somebody online, yeah.
Well, this was still about the AI and bias.
It's not necessarily about the AI, no. It's about First Nations OCAP.
Okay, so I just wanted to say, like, you have to be careful. So you have to be careful with, there's bias in, like you said, everything, because, and bias is cultural. So what we might not think is bias now, we might in 10 years or definitely in 50 years. Like we're learning, I hope, hopefully we're going in the right direction, but sometimes one worries. But bias does exist everywhere. But then there's this whole concept of data wrangling. And while I have lots of friends who are all into data wrangling, the most recent digital humanities project I've been involved in, it was like no data wrangling, because this was a women's print history project from the 17 and 1800s. They were looking for what they could find of the women who were actually involved in writing and printing and blah, 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 blah. And we want all of the anomalies. We want the times when it's just said written by a woman instead of naming her, when it said written by Mrs. John Smith instead of naming her, because that's actually part of the history. That's what they're looking for. So we had got the challenge of trying to work with data with no wrangling, which is a whole bunch of other levels about bias. But yeah.
Okay, so this is a question from Felicity, and I think it's for Mark. Could you be more specific about what OCAP-related attributes might be in your maturity model? Does it indicate a relationship to First Nations populations specifically, or Indigenous as a more general concept? Are there specific procedures to indicate terms of ownership, control, access, and possession of the data set?
So specifically, there are attributes that pertain to ownership and where it is coming, what the geographic area, the place where the data was gathered, who owns that particular data, what the methods of access are, who to contact to get access, et cetera. So all that is covered in it. And then in addition, there's some just basic attributes about whether this actually contains Indigenous data. So, when you look at these things for the first time at a catalog entry for a data set, you're not suddenly going to dive deep into who do I contact. You're going to first want to know, does this contain Indigenous data? And so we have that duality of does it contain versus how do we get access? What does it cover? Things of that nature.